What's up, guys, anonymous writers of the internet? I am the anonymous writer Joey, and it has been a while since our last podcast or even mini podcast came out, and I do apologize for that. I've been busy dealing with some real life stuff, new job and everything, and Doruk has started up school again, as well as a few projects that have been going out, so I do apologize for that, but I'm here with a mini podcast to hopefully help you guys out with any problems you have with writing projects or anything of that sort. So the fan fiction contest is over. We've got 2 stories in here. If you submitted your story for the fan fiction contest and you have the Jason Sun story or you have the YouTube Zombies, please stay in we'll get in contact with you. We'll talk about getting an interview for one of our podcasts coming up, and just talk a little bit about writing, talk a little bit about what got you interested in the fan fiction, and we will work something out. So thank you to all who submitted, and we'll be in contact soon. So one of the things that has something that I discovered when writing for me that really helped me get my ideas going is you have something big, you're starting to write, and then you don't know where something's going. A good idea I have is listing out the characters and what you want these characters to do. So obviously your main character is going to be around for the entire thing, or your main characters will be around for your entire story. So listing out their roadmap can help you design everything there, but obviously their roadmap might not be completely clear. So having minor characters that you can build in and help create these arcs, create these stories, and how they fit into each story is a great way to get yourself involved with the story and help you get your story going. For example, if you have a main character, the general hero story starts from nothing, and at the end he's going to end up a hero, and he's got 2 major battles to fight. If you want him to be like a hero. I'm sorry, this is going to come off the top of my head from what I have to do, but let's just say, medieval times, he comes up as like a blacksmith's son, grabs a sword, finds out he's a good swordsman, and he's got to go into 2 battles to save his land and becomes a hero. Well, how do you get from, he's the son of a blacksmith to the hero? You got to come up with some things on there. So you come up with a supporting character, a couple of supporting characters, figure out, okay, what describes these characters, what do they do, how do they come into this story in certain ways, and then you come up with, the sword teacher, what did he do, how did he get to where he is, who does he know, and, how does he teach, and that gets you a little bit of the background into your story. It allows you to bring in the world a little bit and helps you think about how you want this world to be. And then, some minor characters along the way, who's the bad guy in this story, what is his goal, what is he trying to accomplish. And as you're coming up with these characters and coming up with, their descriptions and what they're trying to do, you can start to have a story that just comes together. You can have some minor characters pop in here and there. This is what they do in my story, this is what I want them to do in my story. And then once you come up with all of those, you have lists of events based off of what these characters are trying to do. Some of them might coincide with each other, some might happen once and then others might happen later. It might have to be, this event A happens, which affects event B and creates event C. So then the next thing you're going to want to do is outline your ideas. So your characters have created certain points. You've got all these events that happen by creating your character, and you've got all the events. Now you need to outline all of these events, all of these ideas that come in, and you start from the beginning. The son or the apprentice of a blacksmith. There's your starting point. Now this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, and in there we create, a backstory, a reason for what's happening, and how he gets into the first battle, the first conflict. And he does well in the conflict, and now we need this to happen, this to happen, this to happen, and he's got to be introduced to, becoming in this position where he can be a hero, setting up this final battle. Then final battle happens, and then the story goes to its conclusion, happy ending. The hero is there. So I feel like a best way to get to getting your idea of a story to happen to, okay, I have everything, I have a good idea of how I want to do this, now I can start writing, is to just start with characters, what you want these characters to do in your story, then taking the plot points that you created from those characters and outlining them together. So, that's a really good way of setting something up like that. So, next up, I talked about this before. If you go back and watch my interview with a twice published author, action scenes. You don't necessarily need to write down your action scenes. You can have a little bit of a description, maybe a paragraph or two. I do remember reading, it's been a while, but if you go back and reread the Twin Towers from the Lord of the Rings series, the battle at Helm's Deep was probably a page long, and if you go and watch the movie, that took up like 30-40% of the movie, just that battle scene alone. So, there's different ways you can put in action scenes. There's different ways you can describe it. You can if you want your battle scenes to take up a long time, if the battle scenes are intense enough and you want the story to be focused on these, you want the story to come to these battle scenes and be focused there, I think for me, describing everything that happens in the battle scene is a way to do it. And when you're doing that, if you're doing a small scale battle, then you can keep everything going. If you're doing a large scale battle, one of the things I've seen from actually having movies broken down for me, with the best example that I heard was The Lord of the Rings, Two Towers, the battle scene for Helm's Deep, where you had this gigantic battle. There's everything that's happening there, and you have your main characters doing some one thing that changes the outcome of a battle. When you have the orcs are pushing up against the wall, and they have the dynamite put into the little sewer to blow up the wall, and the orc is running through there. Aragorn spots it. Legolas's job is to take him down. It doesn't happen. So you have your main characters focused on one thing, and that one thing opens the wall, and it completely shifts the battle, and you can tell a story. You can tell how the entire battle goes through describing your main characters and the actions they took and how that changed the battle. So if you're going to write action scenes of that part, then you're going to want to find a way to incorporate your main characters into the battle while still being able to keep your, you want to be able to describe the intense and the magnitude of the battle, the quantities involved, what's happening in the battle, but you also want to keep your main characters involved in the story, and that's how you do it. You have their individual tasks, their individual efforts in the battle affect the battle as a whole. But as far as, if you don't want to be describing action scenes, if your book is more about what happens outside the action scenes, then, keeping the action scenes to a minimum. The battle happens, there was this that happened, our main characters did this, got out of there. Maybe like a page, if it's if it's really intense, and then you move on to the next thing, and you just move into the next part. But the key part of the action scenes for that is establishing, what your battles can do, and then bringing in different ways to have different ways so that your audience can just realize what's going on, and then make sure that anything that pops up later that you haven't already established, you can kind of establish, but everything else can be implied. And then as soon as the action is over, you need to suck your readers right back into the stories that are happening, because the action scenes is not meant to suck your reader in and be fully engaged in that. I have to keep reading, I have to keep going, so you need to get back to that thing to suck in. So to close up this mini podcast, I'm going to give some books that you're going to want to go ahead and read, and I guess you can also relate this to movies that you might want to watch. So recently I've been getting into some Michael Lewis books, and books and movies. Now, if you don't know who Michael Lewis is, I guess the best way to figure out who he is and what kind of stuff he writes is he was the author for The Blind Side. Now, whether you like that movie or not, it's not really his typical stuff. But what he does is he goes out and he finds these interesting stories and describes them. But the two books and movies that I recommend you go out and find and watch and read is Moneyball and The Big Short. Now, the reason that I suggest these is this might open up a completely new genre for you to write and to create a story about, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. For me, I've seen these movies a couple of times, and I've read the books, and rewatching the movies got me completely interested. Like, I've completely shut down one of my projects and started a new writing project as well, because of watching Moneyball again. Moneyball is a story about how the Oakland Athletics in 2002 had to completely change their system after losing 3 star players for a large amount of money, and they had almost no money to compete. They were, the bottom percentile of teams in Major League Baseball as far as money was, as far as salary cap was concerned. So they had to look at a way to get around that and still be able to compete. And the way they had to do it was to completely revolutionize the game of baseball, and it just kind of follows the stats and how it's called sabermetrics, how to look at baseball players completely differently than what was previously done. And it tells a pretty fun story. It tells a pretty interesting story on how they were fought every step of the way, why they were fought every step of the way, and how well it turned out, and what happened to it. And it definitely changed the way baseball is. Since their inception of it from 2002. I mean, obviously you can go on, you can look out there. There are some exceptions to the rule. The biggest one I can tell you is they don't really cover the pitching, which they don't cover the pitching very well. I mean, obviously they had Barry Zito at the time, who was, for anyone who doesn't know baseball, he was an excellent pitcher, and it definitely helped them get there. But the story of the sabermetrics is still something that's very interesting to see. The other book and movie that he wrote the book, and it's inspired the movie, is called The Big Short. The Big Short is about the 2008 financial crisis, and the way he goes about explaining the financial crisis for people is by following three groups of people who predicted the fall of the mortgage. They predicted the mortgage crisis, and what they did is called a short. So they bet against the housing market being stable, and they made a lot of money off of it. They made a lot of money betting against the housing market, which was seen as ridiculous at the time. And you go past the numbers for it. And it's the way he writes, the way he makes this, and the way the movies are presented is taking stuff that's normally really boring, really complex, really like the not fun stuff to understand. Obviously, like The Wolf of Wall Street followed the complete lifestyle of one of these big bankers or one of these big stockbrokers, and how awesome his life was. And he was a terrible person, but it was so much fun to watch that stuff. What this stuff does is they go away from the lifestyle and they go straight to the numbers, the stuff that's supposed to be boring, and they find a way to make it interesting. And I feel like that is a genre that needs to be out there, that people need to know about, people need to read about, watch movies about, because it's informing you, but at the same time, you get entertained from it. There's entertainment in there. And The Big Short, if you go and watch the movie first, because if you go and watch that movie and you get interested about that right away, and you watch Moneyball, I mean, they're both Brad Pitt movies, so you can't, they're good movies. I mean, aside from World War Z, Brad Pitt's been doing great movies. But, there are great movies in there. You have Christian Bale in The Big Short. You have Steve Carell playing a non-funny character, which he manages to pull off. It's loaded with big actors, and they break it down to a point where it's interesting to follow. You might not understand it completely, but it gets you to want to understand it. So once you watch The Big Short, then go read the book. Watch Moneyball, then go read the book. Because the way these movies have been created, they create it to more of a story that can entertain people and get you interested in the subject. And once you are interested in that subject, reading the book is a whole lot easier and way more informative. So those are two movies that I felt had to be out there. If it might end up inspiring you to write something completely different. It might inspire you to change your book. It might inspire you to start writing, or at the very least, you learn about something new, and you go and you rewatch them, and you read some books. So, that's it for the mini podcast. I want to thank everyone who stuck around this far. Make sure to like and subscribe. I'll try to get the channel a little more active now that things are starting to settle down a little bit. Hopefully, they'll be a little more settled going into October, November, and December. We'll try and get the fan fiction guys on for some interviews. We'll also try and get our friend on the show who's publishing his book Exit in November. We'll try to get him back on the show, get him a little hype there, talk about his book a little more, see what we can get from him, and we'll see you guys in the next podcast. Peace.
Hey, getting some writing done there, buddy?
Yeah, setting up in public so everybody can watch me type my big screenplay.
Me too. All real writers need to be seen writing, otherwise what's the point, right?
You should totally write that down.
Okay, will you watch me?